For 7 years, her husband convinced her she was worthless, barren, a burden no one could love. Then, on one frozen winter night, after he'd thrown her away like trash, a vampire king feared across realms, traveling with 5 grieving children, found her dying on a bench, and saw not weakness, but destiny. This is the story of a woman who thought her life was ending, a kingdom haunted by loss, and how sometimes the person you save ends up saving your entire world. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. King Alistair Draven pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders, though the cold never bothered him. The gesture was habit, nothing more, a remnant from centuries ago, when he'd still been human enough to feel winter's bite. The carriage wheels creaked behind him as they rolled through the mortal realm. It was past midnight. He'd been traveling for 3 days straight from the frostbound province with his 5 children, all vampire-born, all exhausted. They needed to reach the Obsidian Keep before dawn, but the journey through the mortal world was necessary to avoid the political vultures circling his throne. He couldn't keep doing this, ruling alone, raising 5 grieving children while enemies whispered that a king without a queen was a king without power. The snow fell heavier now, casting long shadows across the empty street as Alistair led his children through the sleeping town. That's when he saw her. A woman sat hunched on a wooden bench near an abandoned bus stop, arms wrapped around herself, trembling violently in the winter cold. Her blonde hair caught the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, and even from a distance, Alistair could see she had nothing. No coat, no bag, just a thin sweater clinging to her frame. He should keep walking. God knows he had enough problems. 5 children who barely spoke anymore, a kingdom fracturing at its seams, and nobles circling like wolves. But his feet stopped before his mind could argue. Father? Lucian's voice was quiet, uncertain. The oldest of his children, always watching, always aware. Stay close, Alistair murmured, then moved toward the bench. The snow crunched under his boots, and the woman's head snapped up. Alistair saw fear flash across her face, raw, primal terror that made something ancient in his chest tighten. He'd seen that look before, too many times. I won't hurt you, he said, his voice low, deliberately gentle despite its inhuman resonance. Up close, he could see her better. Early 30s, with golden hair darkened by melting snow and hazel eyes that stared at him with a mixture of suspicion and something worse, resignation. As if she'd already accepted whatever came next. I'm fine, she whispered, but the word came out broken, fractured by chattering teeth. You're freezing. Alistair glanced back at his children, all 5 watching with wide eyes. When did you last eat? She didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to her trembling hands, and that's when Alistair noticed the bruises on her wrists, dark, finger-shaped marks that told stories he didn't need to hear to understand. Something in him shifted. The ancient predator that lived beneath his skin recognized prey, yes, but also recognized something else. Survival. Defiance. Strength that refused to break, even when everything else had. Behind him, little Mira stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the snow-muffled silence. She's cold, father. Like us when Mama... She didn't finish. She never did. Alistair removed his cloak in one smooth motion and held it out. Take this. I can't. You will. Not a command. A certainty. My children and I are traveling north. There's an inn 3 streets from here. Let me buy you a meal at least. I don't have money to pay you back. I'm not asking you to. Vanessa Hale looked up at this stranger, this impossibly beautiful, terrifying man with silver-white hair and eyes that glowed faintly red in the darkness, and felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. Small and fragile, but there. Why? She asked. Alistair was silent for a moment, snow gathering on his shoulders. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. Because you're still here, which means you're stronger than whatever tried to destroy you. He paused, his expression softening in a way that made him look almost human. And because I'd want someone to do the same if it was someone I cared about sitting out here alone. Vanessa stood slowly, her legs stiff from hours in the cold. She swayed, and Alistair instinctively reached out to steady her, then stopped when she flinched. "Apologies," he said quietly. "I have 5 children. I'm used to catching people before they fall." 5. Despite everything, surprise colored her voice. 5. Alistair's expression softened further as he glanced back at the small figures huddled together. All the same age. It's chaos. His voice dropped to something achingly human. It used to be beautiful chaos. Now it's just chaos. Vanessa pulled the cloak around herself. It smelled like winter wind and something else, something ancient and pine dark. The children watched her with identical expressions of cautious curiosity. The smallest one, a girl with dark curls, smiled shyly. "The inn isn't far," Alistair said, gesturing toward the carriage. "You're safe. I give you my word." Vanessa hesitated at the carriage door. Every survival instinct screamed that this was wrong, that men who looked like fallen angels and traveled with silent children in the dead of night were dangerous. But she was already in danger. Already broken. Already cast out. What did she have left to lose? She climbed into the carriage, and 5 small children immediately made room for her, their supernatural warmth a shocking contrast to the frozen world outside. As Alistair closed the door and the carriage lurched forward, Vanessa realized something. She'd stopped shivering. For the first time in 7 years, someone had chosen not to hurt her. And though she didn't know it yet, that single act of mercy would change the fate of 2 worlds. Vanessa hadn't always been the woman trembling on a bench in the snow. Once, she'd been young and hopeful, married to a man who promised her everything. For 7 years, she'd believed his promises would come true. For 7 years, she believed the fault was hers. Vanessa woke to darkness that breathed. Not the absence of light, but something alive. Shadows that moved with purpose across walls made of black glass. Her eyes struggled to focus, and when they did, she wished they hadn't. The chamber stretched impossibly high, its vaulted ceiling lost in darkness. Torches lined the walls, but their flames burned cold and blue, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. The bed beneath her was soft, too soft, draped in fabrics that whispered against her skin like living things. This wasn't the inn. Panic clawed up her throat. She tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. Every muscle ached with a bone-deep exhaustion that felt like drowning. "Be still." The voice came from her left, low, feminine, and utterly inhuman. A woman stood beside the bed, tall and pale as moonlight, with eyes that reflected the torchlight like a cat's. She wore robes the color of dried blood, and her hands moved with practiced precision as she pressed a cool cloth to Vanessa's forehead. "Where?" Vanessa's voice cracked. "Where am I?" "The obsidian keep." The woman didn't smile. "You're safe. Though I imagine that means little right now." Another figure moved in the shadows. Another pale face. Another set of reflective eyes. Then another. 3 healers, all moving with that same predatory grace, all focused entirely on her. Vanessa's breath came in short gasps. "You're vampires, yes." The first healer's tone was matter-of-fact. "As is the king who brought you here. As are his children." She tilted her head, studying Vanessa with clinical interest. "You're mortal. That much is obvious. What's less obvious is why the king risked traveling through mortal lands to save you." Across the room, half hidden in shadow, Alistair stood with his arms crossed. He hadn't changed from his travel clothes, still wore that ornate coat, still had snow melting in his silver hair. His red eyes tracked every movement the healers made, but his expression remained unreadable. "How long have I been here?" Vanessa managed. 6 hours, Alistair said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You collapsed in the carriage shortly after we crossed into the nocturnal dominion. Hypothermia, malnutrition, exhaustion." He paused. "You were dying. I should leave." Vanessa tried to push herself up again, but her arms gave out. "I don't belong here. I'm not. I'm just." "You're recovering." The healer's hand pressed firmly, but gently against her shoulder. "And you'll do so lying down." A small sound came from the doorway, a stifled giggle. Vanessa's gaze snapped toward it, and she saw them. 5 small faces peering around the massive obsidian door frame. The girl with dark curls, Mira, waved shyly. Beside her, a boy with Alistair's sharp features and serious eyes watched with open curiosity. 3 others crowded behind them, various expressions of interest and wariness on their pale, beautiful faces. "Out," Alistair said without turning around. "I told you she needed rest." "But father, we just wanted to see if she's okay," the oldest boy protested. His voice carried that same ancient quality as Alistair's, though higher, younger. "Lucian." The single word held authority that made all 5 children immediately retreat, though Vanessa caught Mira blowing her a kiss before disappearing. The healer examining Vanessa's wrists suddenly went very still. Her fingers traced something along the inside of Vanessa's left forearm, a spot that had always been there, always been slightly darker than the surrounding skin. Vanessa had assumed it was a birthmark. "My lady," the healer said quietly, addressing someone Vanessa couldn't see. "Come look at this." Another vampire stepped into the light, older, with silver streaking through her dark hair. She took Vanessa's arm with surprising gentleness, tilting it toward the torchlight. "Gods below," she whispered. Alistair moved then, crossing the room in 3 impossibly fast strides. He looked down at Vanessa's arm, and something shifted in his expression, something that might have been shock. "What is it?" Vanessa pulled her arm back instinctively. "What's wrong with me?" "Nothing is wrong with you." The silver-haired healer exchanged a loaded glance with Alistair. "But you bear a mark, a sigil, very old, very deliberately placed." "I don't understand." "That's just a birthmark. It's a seal." Alistair's voice had gone quiet, almost dangerous. "A confinement seal. Someone placed it on you, likely when you were very young. It's been suppressing something." "Suppressing what?" No one answered. Vanessa looked between the healers and the king, fear turning to something sharper. "What does it mean? Am I dangerous?" "Is that why?" "You're not dangerous." Alistair crouched beside the bed, bringing himself to eye level with her. This close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features, the weight of centuries in those inhuman eyes. "But someone thought you were valuable enough to hide. My husband said I was worthless." The words came out bitter. He said I was broken, barren, that I'd never be anything more than a burden. Something flickered across Alistair's face. Anger, maybe, or recognition. "Your husband," he said slowly, "was a fool. You don't know me. I know you were dying in the snow, and you're still alive. I know my children haven't smiled at a stranger since their mother died, and they smiled at you." His gaze held hers, unflinching. "I know that seal was placed by someone with considerable power, which means you are not, have never been worthless." Vanessa felt tears prick her eyes and hated herself for it. "Why did you bring me here?" "Because you were dying." Alistair stood, his expression shifting back to that unreadable mask. "I made a choice. Now you're alive." He gestured to the healer. "Get her strong enough to walk. She'll need proper quarters." "Wait." Vanessa struggled to sit up. "I can't stay here." "I'm not. This is a palace. I'm just." "You're under the protection of the Vampire King," Alistair said flatly. "Which means you stay until I deem it safe for you to leave." He paused at the door, looking back. "And Vanessa? Don't wander. This keep has 1,000 rooms, and not all of them are safe for mortals." The door closed behind him with a sound like a tomb ceiling. Vanessa lay back against the pillows, trembling. Through the high windows, she could see a sky that held 3 moons instead of 1, each casting a different colored light across the obsidian spires of an impossible castle. She wasn't in her world anymore. And somehow, impossibly, she wasn't sure she wanted to go back. By the 3rd day, Vanessa had learned 3 things about the Obsidian Keep. The hallways shifted when you weren't looking, the servants moved like ghosts, and King Alistair's children were terrible at following orders. She heard them before she saw them, whispered giggles, and the soft shuffle of feet outside her guest quarters. The door, which she could have sworn was closed, stood slightly ajar. "I can't hear you," Vanessa called out, unable to suppress a smile. The whispering stopped. Then, after a beat of silence, the door swung open and all 5 children tumbled in like they'd been leaning against it. Mira came first, clutching something against her chest. We wanted to see if you were feeling better. Father said not to bother you, the oldest boy, Lucien, added quickly, though he made no move to leave. But technically we're just checking. That's not bothering. Vanessa sat up against the pillows, still weak, but stronger than she'd been. That's some very creative interpretation of rules. We're good at that, said one of the boys, the one with wild dark hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. He plopped himself on the edge of her bed without invitation. I'm Ash. That's Vale. He pointed to a quiet boy hovering near the door, and the little one trying to climb up is Saren. The smallest of them all, a boy who couldn't have been more than 6 in human years, was indeed attempting to scale the side of the massive bed. Vanessa instinctively reached down and lifted him up, settling him beside her. Saren immediately curled against her side, his small body radiating an unnatural warmth. He smelled like winter pine and something sweet, like childhood itself, if childhood could have a scent. Saren doesn't talk much, Mira explained, climbing up on the other side. Not since Mama died. The room went very quiet. I'm sorry, Vanessa said softly. Losing your mother must have been terrible. It was 2 years ago, Lucien said, his voice carefully neutral. Father doesn't like us to talk about it. Father doesn't like us to talk about a lot of things, Ash muttered. Mira thrust out the paper she'd been clutching. I drew this. For you. Vanessa took it carefully. The drawing was done in charcoal and colored chalk, 6 figures standing together. 5 small ones she recognized as the children, and 1 larger figure in the center with golden hair. Her. It's beautiful, Vanessa whispered, her throat tight. But I think you made a mistake. I'm not part of your family. You could be, Mira said simply, if you stayed. Before Vanessa could respond, the door swung fully open. Alistair stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. Out. All of you. Now. 5 children scrambled immediately, but Saren burrowed closer to Vanessa, his small fingers clutching her borrowed nightgown. Vanessa instinctively wrapped her arm around him. Saren. Alistair's voice softened marginally. Come. The boy shook his head against Vanessa's side. Alistair entered the room, and Vanessa could see the frustration warring with something else in his face. Exhaustion, maybe, or defeat. He needs to let you rest. He's not bothering me, Vanessa heard herself say. She looked down at the small boy pressed against her, then back at the king. He's grieving. They all are. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? The words came out sharper than she intended. I know what it's like to be told you can't feel what you're feeling. To have someone decide your pain isn't convenient enough to acknowledge. Alistair's eyes flashed. You've been here 3 days. And in 3 days, your children have told me more about their mother than you apparently have in 2 years. The silence that followed was dangerous. Alistair stood motionless, his jaw tight, and Vanessa realized she'd just challenged a vampire king in his own fortress. But instead of anger, something crumbled in his expression, something ancient and wounded. Their mother died in this room, he said quietly. She was killed by an assassin who got past every ward, every guard, every protection I'd put in place. His hands clenched at his sides. So forgive me if I don't encourage them to dwell on it. Vanessa's anger evaporated. I'm sorry. I didn't. Saren found her. Alistair's voice had gone hollow. He was the first one to reach her. He hasn't spoken since. The small boy in Vanessa's arms trembled. Without thinking, she pressed a kiss to the top of his head and began rocking gently, humming something wordless and soothing. Alistair watched them, his expression unreadable. Then he crossed the room and sat carefully on the edge of the bed, far enough to maintain distance, close enough that Saren could see him. I'm not good at this, Alistair admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The grief, the gentleness. I know how to protect them, how to rule, but I don't know how to. He gestured helplessly. How to let them hurt, Vanessa finished softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Vanessa saw past the ancient predator, past the king, to the man underneath, the widower raising 5 children alone, drowning in a grief he couldn't show them. Your boots are untied, Vanessa said suddenly to Saren, desperate to break the moment's intensity. Saren looked down at his small leather boots, then back up at her with wide eyes. Here. Vanessa shifted him in her lap. I'll teach you. It's easy once you know the trick. She walked him through it slowly, her hands guiding his small fingers through the loops and knots. Saren's tongue poked out in concentration, and when he finally pulled the bow tight, he looked up at her with something like wonder. Then he looked at his father and pointed at his boot, a tiny smile breaking across his face. Alistair's entire expression transformed. The hardness melted away, replaced by something raw and aching. He reached out and ruffled Saren's hair with unexpected tenderness. Well done, he murmured. Vanessa looked away, feeling like she'd witnessed something too intimate, too private. But when she glanced back, Alistair was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Thank you, he said quietly. Before Vanessa could respond, voices drifted in from the hallway, low, conspiratorial whispers that carried that peculiar vampire resonance. Mortal has no business in the royal wing. King is making a mistake. First he loses his queen, now he takes in strays. The children are too attached already. It's unseemly. Alistair's had snapped toward the door, his eyes blazing red. He stood in one fluid motion, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Stay here, he told Vanessa, his voice cold as a grave. All of you. He was gone before she could protest, the door closing with barely a whisper. But Vanessa had heard enough. She looked down at Saren, who'd gone very still in her arms, then at Myra's drawing, the 6 of them, together like a family. She didn't belong here. The nobles were right. So why did leaving feel like abandoning the only people who'd seen her as something other than broken? Vanessa woke up on the floor of the children's study, Lucien's frightened face hovering above her. Don't move, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Father's coming. The room spun. Vanessa tried to remember what had happened. She'd been helping Mira with her reading, laughing at something Ash had said, and then the world had tilted sideways. Heat had exploded through her left arm, burning from the inside out. The sigil. What were you thinking? Alistair's voice cut through her confusion. He materialized beside her, his hands already assessing, checking her pulse, her pupils. You're still recovering. You shouldn't be. I was just reading to them, Vanessa managed. Her arm throbbed, and when she looked down, she could see the mark glowing faintly through her skin, pulsing with a light that definitely hadn't been there before. Alistair saw it too. His expression went very still. Get the head healer, he said to Lucien. Now. Within minutes, the silver-haired healer swept into the room, took one look at Vanessa's arm, and went pale, which, for a vampire, was saying something. Move her to the healing chamber, she commanded, carefully. And clear the children out. No, Mira protested. We want to stay with her. Out. Alistair's tone brooked no argument. Vale, take your siblings to the West Tower. Now. Vanessa barely registered being lifted, carried through corridors that blurred together. The pain in her arm intensified, spreading up to her shoulder, down to her fingertips. It felt like something was trying to claw its way out from beneath her skin. The healing chamber was different from the room she'd woken in days ago, smaller, more clinical, with symbols carved into every surface. They laid her on a stone table that hummed with residual magic. Hold her down, the healer said. Alistair's hands pressed against Vanessa's shoulders, firm but not painful. His face hovered above hers, and she could see genuine worry in those red eyes. This is going to hurt, the healer warned. The seal is breaking. It's been breaking since you entered the nocturnal dominion, but something accelerated it just now. What do you mean, breaking? Vanessa gasped. The healer didn't answer. Instead, she placed both hands over the sigil and began chanting in a language Vanessa didn't recognize, something ancient and flowing, each word carrying weight that pressed against her chest. The mark flared brilliant white. Vanessa screamed. Images flooded her mind, memories that weren't hers. A woman with her face wearing a crown made of starlight, walking through halls that predated the Obsidian Keep. A marriage between mortal and vampire. A prophecy. A betrayal. Blood on stone. And then, darkness. Centuries of it. A bloodline scattered, hidden, sealed away. When Vanessa opened her eyes again, she was shaking violently. Alistair still held her shoulders, but his expression had transformed into something between awe and horror. "What?" Vanessa's voice cracked. "What did you see?" "Everything," the healer whispered. She staggered back from the table, her hands trembling. "Your Majesty, she's not just anyone." The seal wasn't blocking fertility. It was blocking her lineage, her power. "Explain," Alistair said, his voice deadly quiet. The healer looked at Vanessa with something like reverence. "She's descended from Seraphina Thorne, the first mortal queen, the one who unified the vampire clans 3,000 years ago." The room went silent. "That's impossible," Alistair said. "Seraphina's bloodline was extinguished. Everyone knows." Everyone was meant to think that. The healer gestured to the now dormant sigil on Vanessa's arm. "This seal is ancient, powerful, deliberately designed to hide what she is. Someone, likely her ancestors, wanted to keep her hidden until the right time." "The right time for what?" Vanessa pushed herself up on shaking arms. "I'm nobody. I'm a divorced mortal woman who couldn't even have children." "You couldn't have children because the seal suppressed everything," the healer interrupted gently. "Your fertility, your magic, your connection to your ancestral power. It was a protection, yes, but also a prison." The words hit Vanessa like physical blows. 7 years. 7 years of her husband's cruelty, his accusations, the endless shame of being called barren. All of it. "It wasn't my fault," she whispered. "No," Alistair said quietly. "It never was." Something inside Vanessa shattered. Years of grief, shame, self-hatred came pouring out in wrenching sobs that tore through her chest. She doubled over on the stone table, and distantly she felt arms wrap around her. Strong, cold, steady. Alistair pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head. He didn't speak, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just held her while she broke apart, his presence an anchor in the storm. "He told me I was worthless," Vanessa gasped against his shoulder. "Every day, every night, he said I was broken, defective, that no one would ever want me. He lied." Alistair's voice vibrated through his chest. He was a fool who didn't recognize what stood before him. "But I believed him. I believed." "I know." His hand moved in slow circles against her back. "I know what it's like to be told you're failing at the one thing you're supposed to do. To have everyone watch and wait for you to crumble." Vanessa pulled back enough to see his face. His eyes held centuries of pain, carefully controlled, but never fully hidden. "The kingdom thinks I'm weak," he continued quietly. "A king without a queen is half a ruler. Every day, someone reminds me of what I've lost, what I've failed to replace." "You're not weak," Vanessa said fiercely. "You're raising 5 children alone while running a kingdom. And you're not broken." He cupped her face with unexpected gentleness. "You never were." Outside the chamber, Vanessa heard whispers, small voices, frightened and protective. "If anyone hurts her, I'll bite them. Ash, you can't just bite nobles. Watch me. Father will protect her. He has to." Alistair's expression softened. "They're listening at the door." "I know." Vanessa managed a watery smile. "They're terrible at being sneaky." "We can't hear you," Lucian called out. "And we're not terrible. We're just concerned." The door cracked open, and 5 faces peered in with varying expressions of worry and defiance. "You can't send her away now," Mira declared. "She's special." The healers said so. "More special than we thought," Vale added quietly. Alistair looked at Vanessa, then at his children, something shifting in his expression, a decision being made. "No," he said finally. "I'm not sending her away." Vanessa's heart stuttered. "But the nobles can adapt." Alistair stood, helping her to her feet. "You're a descendant of the first mortal queen. That makes you politically significant, possibly dangerous to my enemies." His expression was unreadable. "It means you need protection. And it means you stay." It wasn't an invitation. It was a decree. And Vanessa, still shaking from revelation and release, found she didn't want to argue. 3 weeks after the seal broke, Vanessa woke without pain for the first time in 7 years. Not the dull ache in her chest from years of emotional abuse. Not the phantom cold that had settled into her bones that night at the bus stop. Just nothing. Lightness. The unfamiliar sensation of simply existing without carrying the weight of someone else's cruelty. She found the children in the conservatory, a glass-domed room filled with night-blooming flowers that only grew under the light of the 3 moons. Ash was attempting to teach Vale some kind of card game while Mira sketched in her ever-present notebook. Lucian read in the corner, and Saren sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully arranging smooth stones into patterns. "There she is," Ash announced, grinning. "We were about to send a search party." "I slept in," Vanessa admitted, settling onto the cushioned bench beside Mira. "Apparently my body forgot what actual rest feels like." "Father says that's good," Lucian said without looking up from his book. "That you're healing properly." Vanessa's cheeks warmed at the mention of Alistair. She'd seen him every day since the revelation. Meals with the children, evening walks through the gardens, quiet moments in the library where they discuss everything from ancient history to the proper way to discipline 5 precocious vampire children. Each conversation felt like peeling back layers, discovering the man beneath the crown. "What are you drawing?" Vanessa asked Mira. The girl held up her sketchbook. It was Vanessa, sitting in this exact spot, surrounded by flowers and moonlight. But in the drawing, she was smiling, truly smiling, with a lightness in her expression Vanessa wasn't sure she'd ever actually worn. "Is that really how I look?" she whispered. "When you're with us, yes," Mira said simply. Then, softer, "Can I call you Nessa?" Vanessa feels too formal. Something warm bloomed in Vanessa's chest. "I'd like that." "Nessa." Mira tested the name, then beamed. "Perfect." Vale attempted a complicated card shuffle, fumbled, and sent cards flying everywhere. Vanessa laughed, a real, unguarded sound that startled even her. It echoed through the conservatory, bright and unexpected. From the doorway, Alistair froze mid-step. Vanessa caught his expression before he could mask it. Surprise, yes, but also something softer. Wonder, maybe. As if he'd witnessed something rare and precious. Their eyes met across the room, and Vanessa felt her breath catch. "Father." Ash broke the moment. "Come settle this. Vale says aces are worth 10 points, but that's ridiculous." The evening dissolved into playful arguing, Alistair ultimately declaring both children wrong just to watch them protest in unison. But throughout it all, Vanessa felt his gaze returning to her, thoughtful and searching. Later, after the children had been coaxed to bed with promises of stargazing tomorrow night, Vanessa found herself alone with Alistair in the library. He was reviewing territorial maps while she curled up with a book about vampire history, trying to understand the world she'd stumbled into. "Ash told me something today," she said into the comfortable silence. Alistair looked up. "Should I be worried?" He said he used to have nightmares. "Every night since." She trailed off, not wanting to mention the Queen's death directly. "But he hasn't had one since I arrived." Alistair set down his quill carefully. "He told you that?" "He wanted me to know I was helping, that my being here mattered." Vanessa closed her book. "I think he was afraid I'd leave." "Would you?" The question came out quiet, almost vulnerable. "Leave? Where would I go?" Vanessa meant it lightly, but the truth underneath was heavier. She had nowhere else. No one else. Alistair stood, crossing to the window where Vanessa sat. He leaned against the frame, close enough that she could feel the supernatural cold that radiated from him. Not unpleasant, just other. "You could go anywhere," he said. "You're descended from the first mortal queen. That makes you valuable to every house, every faction. They'd offer you protection, titles, wealth. I don't want those things." "Then what do you want?" Vanessa looked up at him, at this ancient king who'd found her dying in the snow and given her a reason to keep breathing. "I want to feel like I belong somewhere. Like I'm not just taking up space." "You've never just taken up space." Alistair's voice carried an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Not here. Not with them." He paused. "Not with me." Vanessa stood, bringing them closer. She reached for the map he'd been studying, and their fingers brushed, barely a touch, just skin against skin. Lightning. The sensation shot up Vanessa's arm, Not painful but electric, alive. She gasped, and Alistair's eyes flared red for just a moment before he pulled back, putting careful distance between them. "Sorry," he said roughly. "The magic in your blood, it reacts to..." "To what?" He didn't answer. That night, Vanessa dreamed. She stood in a throne room that predated the Obsidian Keep, facing a woman who wore her face but carried herself with regal certainty. The woman's crown glowed with captured starlight, and her eyes, Vanessa's eyes, held ancient wisdom. "You were always meant for this," the woman said. "Queen Seraphina. They tried to hide you, to keep you safe. But destiny doesn't forget its own." "I'm not you," Vanessa protested. You're exactly who you need to be." Seraphina smiled. "And he sees it. The king. He sees you." Vanessa woke with tears on her cheeks and a certainty settling in her bones. She was falling in love with Alistair Draven, and it terrified her. She decided to leave, not because she wanted to, because staying meant risking her heart again, meant potentially bringing more trouble to a family that had already suffered enough. The noble's whispers had grown louder. Accusations that she was manipulating the king, using the children, threatening the kingdom's stability. She packed quietly just before dawn, moving through the guest quarters she'd come to think of as home. She didn't make it past the main hall. All 5 children stood blocking the doorway, still in their nightclothes, faces set with determination. "No," Lucian said simply. "You can't leave," Mira added, her voice wobbling. "You can't. I'm causing problems for your father." "You're helping our father," Ash interrupted. "He smiles now. Did you know that?" "He actually smiles." Saren walked forward and wrapped his small arms around Vanessa's waist, burying his face against her. Then, in a voice rough from disuse, he whispered, "Stay." Vanessa's bag hit the floor. She was crying. They were crying, and then Alistair was there, materializing from the shadows with an expression that made her chest ache. "You were going to leave without saying goodbye," he said quietly. "I thought it would be easier." "For whom?" He moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. "The children are happy, truly happy. I am." He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I'm better. With you here. The kingdom can be damned if they don't understand that." "Alistair. You belong here, Vanessa." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with devastating gentleness. "More than you know. More than I can properly explain." His thumb brushed her cheek. "Stay, please." Surrounded by 5 children who'd claimed her as theirs, facing a king who looked at her like she was something precious, Vanessa finally let herself believe it. She was home. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Marcus Hale discovered his wife was alive on a Tuesday in a bar 3 towns over from where he'd abandoned her. "Heard the strangest thing," the bartender said, wiping down glasses. "Some travelers passing through claimed they saw a mortal woman living in the Obsidian Keep. Blonde thing, they said. Pretty, in that fragile way. Walking around with the Vampire King's children like she belonged there." Marcus's hand tightened around his whiskey glass. "The Obsidian Keep. Can you imagine? A mortal, living with vampires." The bartender laughed. "Probably some rumor. You know how stories get twisted." But Marcus knew. Blonde hair. Fragile. It was Vanessa, it had to be. His useless, barren wife. Somehow alive after he'd left her to freeze. And living with a king. The implications hit him like a fist. If Vanessa had caught the attention of vampire royalty, if she'd somehow become valuable to them, then she was worth something after all. Worth money. Worth power. Worth reclaiming. He left the bar with purpose burning in his chest. He'd thrown away something valuable, and Marcus Hale never wasted assets. He just needed leverage. The demon found him 3 nights later. Marcus woke to sulfur-thick air and a figure standing at the foot of his bed, tall, wrapped in shadows that moved like living things, with eyes that burned coal red. "Marcus Hale," the demon's voice scraped like rusted metal. "You've lost something precious." Marcus should have been terrified. Instead, he sat up slowly, mind already calculating. "What do you want?" "The same thing you want. Access to the Obsidian Keep." The demon circled the bed, its form never quite solidifying. "The Vampire King has something I need, but his wards are Inconvenient. I require an invitation. A mortal connection. My wife, Marcus said slowly. You want me to get my wife back. I want you to reclaim what's yours. In exchange, I'll give you power beyond mortal limitation, strength, influence, the ability to take back everything you've lost and more. Marcus thought of Vanessa, of how she'd looked at him with those wounded eyes when he'd called her worthless. How satisfying it had been to break her down, piece by piece, until she believed every cruel word. What kind of power? The demon smiled, revealing too many teeth, enough to make a king kneel. They shook hands. The bargain sealed with a burst of flame that left Marcus's palm branded with an infernal mark, but also flooded him with strength that felt like liquid lightning. He'd get Vanessa back, not because he loved her, because she was his, and no one took what belonged to Marcus Hale. Not even a vampire king. Vanessa woke up screaming. The dream had been vivid, Marcus's face, twisted with rage, and something worse. Something that wasn't entirely human. Behind him, shadows writhed with hunger, reaching for the obsidian keep, for the children, for Vanessa. Alistair materialized beside her bed, his hands on her shoulders. You're safe. It was just a dream.
No.
Vanessa clutched his forearms, trembling. It wasn't. Something's coming. Something dark, and it's connected to. The keep shuddered. Not an earthquake. Something else. The ancient stones groaned, and from somewhere far below came an inhuman shriek that raised every hair on Vanessa's body. Alistair's eyes blazed red. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. What's happening? We're under attack. He was gone before she could protest, moving with that impossible vampire speed. Vanessa threw on a robe and ran to the window. Below, in the courtyards, she could see them. Creatures made of shadow and flame, clawing at the keep's outer walls. Infernal things that shouldn't exist in the vampire realm. And at the gate, demanding entry, stood a figure she recognized even from this distance. Marcus. Vanessa's blood turned to ice. He'd found her. Somehow, impossibly, he'd found her. She ran. Through corridors filled with guards mobilizing, past servants herding the children to safety, down spiral stairs until she reached the main hall. Alistair stood at the massive doors, facing the gate, his entire body rigid with fury. Alistair, don't open it. I wasn't planning to. He didn't look at her, his focus locked on the figure beyond. But he's made a bargain with something powerful. The words are straining. How did he find me? Does it matter? Alistair's voice carried an edge that could cut stone. He's here. And he's brought an infernal army. Through the reinforced glass panels of the door, Marcus's voice carried, amplified by demonic magic. Vanessa, I know you're in there.
Come out. Come home.
This doesn't have to get ugly. Don't listen to him, Alistair said quietly. He can't get in. Not while I'm standing. But the words flickered. One of the infernal creatures had breached the outer wall. Then another. The demons Marcus had bargained with were powerful, old, and hungry. Vanessa. Marcus's voice again, carrying false concern. I'm worried about you, sweetheart. Living with monsters. They're probably keeping you prisoner. I'm here to save you. Vanessa's hands clenched into fists. He's lying. He doesn't want to save me. He wants to. I know what he wants. Alistair finally looked at her, his expression deadly calm. He wants to use you.
To hurt you.
To drag you back into whatever nightmare you escaped from. He made a deal with a demon, Vanessa whispered. For power. For revenge. Alistair moved toward the door with predatory grace. Men like him always want revenge when their property develops a will of its own. I'm not property. I know. Alistair's hand found hers, squeezed once. But he thinks you are. And that's why he's going to lose. The main doors blew open. Marcus strode wreathed in shadow flame, his eyes burning with borrowed power. Behind him, 3 infernal creatures slithered through, corrupting the stone where they touched. He saw Vanessa and smiled. There you are. Vanessa stepped back instinctively, years of conditioning screaming at her to make herself small, to apologize, to submit. Alistair moved between them like a blade unsheathed. Marcus Hale, His voice dropped to something ancient and terrible. You've made an exceptionally poor choice tonight. Marcus laughed. The Vampire King, defending my wife. How noble. Step aside. Vanessa, we're going home.
No.
The word came from Vanessa, stronger than she expected. I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't have a choice. She has every choice. Alistair's eyes blazed crimson, and the temperature plummeted. You will not touch what is mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened Vanessa. Instead, it sent heat cascading through her chest. Not because he was claiming ownership, but because he was claiming responsibility. Protection.
Care.
Yours. Marcus's expression twisted with rage. She's my wife. My barren, useless wife. She was never barren. Alistair's smile was all teeth. And she's worth more than your demon-bought power could ever comprehend. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around, break your infernal bargain, and disappear from her life. Or what? Alistair's form seemed to expand, shadows rising behind him like wings, ancient power thrumming through the hall. Or, I show you exactly why mortals fear the Vampire King. Marcus hesitated, just for a moment. The demons behind him hissed, urging him forward. And in that hesitation, Vanessa felt something stir beneath her skin, the seal's remnants, the ancestral power, the magic that had been hidden for so long. She wasn't helpless anymore. She wasn't his anymore. And she was done being afraid. Marcus lunged, not at Alistair. He was smarter than that. He went for Vanessa, moving with demon-enhanced speed, his hand reaching for her throat with the same casual cruelty he'd always wielded. But 5 small bodies materialized between them. Lucian stood at the front, fangs bared. Mira and Vale flanked him, their eyes glowing red. Ash crouched low, ready to spring. And Saren, quiet, traumatized Saren, hissed with a ferocity that shook the hall. Touch her and die, Lucian said, his child's voice carrying an ancient threat. Marcus faltered. What? They're mine, Vanessa heard herself say, her voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. And I'm theirs. You have no power here. I have all the power, Marcus roared. The demons behind him surged forward, their shadow forms reaching for the children with claws that dripped with corruption. Terror seized Vanessa, not for herself, but for them. For these 5 children who'd chosen to protect her, who'd claimed her as family, who were now in danger because of her. No. The word ripped from her chest with physical force. Light exploded. It started at the sigil on her arm, the mark that had imprisoned her power for 3 decades. But now it shattered like glass, and what poured out was ancient, brilliant, and utterly devastating. White gold light erupted from Vanessa's body, expanding outward in a wave that knocked everyone back. The children stumbled, but held their ground. Alistair raised an arm to shield his eyes, his expression caught between awe and shock. Marcus screamed. The demons shrieked as the light touched them, their shadow forms dissolving like mist under sunlight. The infernal creatures clawed at the air, trying to retreat, but Vanessa's power was everywhere, flooding the hall, burning through corruption, purifying everything it touched. She could feel it now, the legacy in her blood. Queen Seraphina's gift, passed down through generations, sealed away until this moment. Not vampire magic, not mortal weakness, something in between, something that could stand against darkness without being consumed by it. The power of the first queen, who'd united 2 worlds through love and will. Vanessa raised her hand, and the light concentrated, forming into something solid, a blade made of pure radiance. She pointed it at Marcus, at the demon mark burning on his palm. The bargain, she said, her voice echoing with ancestral authority. I break it. The blade struck, not Marcus's flesh, but the infernal bond itself. The mark on his palm erupted in black flame, and the demon who'd given it to him materialized, dragged into visibility by Vanessa's power. It writhed, screaming in a language that hurt to hear. The pact is sealed, it shrieked. You cannot. I am descended from the first mortal queen. Vanessa's eyes blazed with inherited power. I was there when the first treaties were written. My bloodline predates your claim. And I say, she drove the blade deeper. This bargain is void. The demon exploded into ash. Marcus collapsed, suddenly powerless, suddenly just a man again. He stared at his unmarked palm in horror, then up at Vanessa, who stood haloed in fading light. "What are you?" he whispered. "Not yours." Vanessa walked forward, each step steady despite her trembling hands. The children parted for her, forming a protective honor guard. "I was never yours, Marcus. You just convinced me I was." He scrambled backward. "Vanessa, wait, we can talk about this. I made a mistake. You made 7 years of mistakes." She stood over him now, this man who destroyed her sense of self, piece by careful piece. "You called me worthless.
Broken.
Barren. You made me believe I deserved nothing. I was angry. You were cruel." Vanessa's voice didn't rise. She didn't need to shout. "And I believed you. For so long. I believed every word." Marcus's expression shifted, calculating. "Then you understand. I was frustrated. The pressure to have children, to continue the family line. There was no pressure." Vanessa crouched down, meeting his eyes. "You just enjoyed hurting me, making yourself feel bigger by making me feel small." "That's not. But I'm not small anymore." Vanessa stood. "And you cannot hurt me. Not ever again." She turned her back on him, the ultimate dismissal. Behind her, she heard him try to stand, try to say something, but Alistair's hand clamped down on his shoulder with bruising force. "Guards," Alistair said coldly. "Remove this man from my kingdom. If he returns, kill him." 2 vampire guards materialized and hauled Marcus out. He was screaming threats, promises, apologies, the words of a man who'd lost everything and couldn't comprehend how. Vanessa stood perfectly still, the last traces of light fading from her skin. Then her knees buckled. Alistair caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her into his arms with desperate gentleness. "I have you. The children are safe." Alistair's voice shook. Actually shook. "You saved them. You saved all of us." Vanessa looked up at him and saw something raw in his expression.
Fear.
Real, visceral fear that he'd almost lost her. "I thought he was going to." Alistair stopped, his jaw clenching. "When he reached for you, I couldn't move fast enough. If the children hadn't, but they did." Vanessa reached up, touching his face. "We protected each other." Around them, the 5 children crowded close. Mira was crying silently. Ash looked shaken. Vale gripped Lucian's hand, and Saren pressed against Vanessa's side, his small body trembling. "You glowed," Saren whispered. "Like Mama used to. Like starlight." Alistair's eyes widened.
He's right.
"When my queen used her magic, he looked at Vanessa with something like wonder. Your power. It's similar. Complementary. What does that mean?" "It means..." Alistair carried her toward the private chambers, children following like a protective procession. "It means you were meant to be here. Not by chance. Not by rescue. By design." He laid her on the couch in his study, then knelt beside her, still holding her hand. His thumb traced circles on her wrist, right over where the sigil had been. "I've ruled for 3 centuries, he said quietly. "I've faced assassins, armies, political coups. But watching him reach for you, his grip tightened. I've never been that afraid." "I'm okay," Vanessa whispered. "I'm here. You're here." Alistair pressed his forehead briefly to their joined hands, a gesture of profound relief. "You're here, and you're powerful, and you're yours." Vanessa offered softly, echoing his earlier declaration. His eyes met hers, red and ancient and achingly vulnerable. "If you'll have me." Around them, 5 children held their collective breath. And Vanessa, who'd spent 7 years believing she deserved nothing, smiled. Yes. The lunar convergence came 3 nights later, when all 3 moons aligned and the vampire court assembled to renew their oaths to the crown. It was also when the rival houses struck. "King Alistair has grown weak," Lord Corvus declared from the center of the obsidian throne room, his voice carrying to every corner. "He shelters a mortal, allows his children to grow soft. The nocturnal dominion requires strength, not sentiment." Behind him, 3 other House Lords stood united, House Corvus, House Thorn, House Nightshade. Together, They commanded a third of the kingdom's military strength. "Your queen is dead," Lady Nightshade added, her words like poisoned honey. "Yet you refuse to remarry, to form proper alliances. Instead, you cling to a mortal woman with delusions of heritage." Alastair sat on his throne, perfectly still, perfectly controlled. But Vanessa, standing beside him with the children, could feel the fury radiating from him in waves. "Careful," Alastair said softly. "You're speaking of my intended queen." The throne room erupted in shocked whispers. "Intended?" Corvus laughed. "You cannot be serious. She's mortal, powerless, a liability. She destroyed an infernal army single-handedly," Lucian interrupted, stepping forward. "I watched her do it." "The boy speaks out of turn," Lady Nightshade sneered. "The boy speaks the truth." Alastair rose, and the temperature plummeted. "Vanessa Hale is descended from Queen Seraphina. She carries the bloodline of the first mortal queen, and she is under my protection. Then you choose her over your kingdom." Corvus drew his blade. "So be it." The coup was swift and brutal. Corvus's forces flooded the throne room, 30 warriors against Alastair's 20 guards. Magic crackled through the air, shadow meeting shadow, steel ringing against steel. Alastair moved like death incarnate, his sword singing through the air. But he was one against many, and they'd planned this carefully. Vanessa saw the blade coming before he did, aimed at his back while he fought 3 attackers at once. She didn't think, she just moved. Light erupted from her palms, forming a shield that caught the blade mid-strike. The attacker recoiled, hissing. "You want to fight the king?" Vanessa's voice rang out. "You'll have to go through me first." "Gladly," Corvus snarled, turning toward her. But Vanessa wasn't alone. The 5 children flanked her, their small faces fierce. And her power, Seraphina's legacy, blazed bright enough to cast shadows across the entire hall. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. Vanessa's light drove back the Shadowcaster. Where Alastair's power consumed, hers purified. Together, they were devastating, darkness and light, death and life, perfectly balanced. Lord Corvus lunged at Vanessa with supernatural speed. She met him with a blade of pure radiance, driving it through his shoulder. He screamed and fell. "The throne is not yours to take," Vanessa said, standing over him. Around the room, the coup crumbled. Guards overwhelmed the traitors. House Nightshade's lady fled. House Thorn's lord surrendered. And the court, hundreds of vampires who'd watched in stunned silence, began to kneel. Not to Alastair. To her. Lucian stepped forward, his young voice carrying absolute authority. "She is one of us. She has fought for us, bled for us, protected us." He looked at the kneeling court. "She is our queen, whether you accept it or not." One by one, the resistance crumbled. Even the most skeptical nobles bent their knees, recognizing power when they saw it. But Vanessa only had eyes for Alastair. Later, in the privacy of the royal chambers, Alastair knelt before her. "What are you doing?" Vanessa whispered. "What I should have done weeks ago." He took her hand, his expression raw and open. "I'm not kneeling because fate demands it. Not because you're politically valuable. Not because the court needs a queen." His thumb traced her knuckles. "I'm kneeling because I love you." Vanessa's breath caught. "You walked into my life broken and freezing," he continued, "and you healed my children. You made them laugh again. You made me," his voice cracked slightly, "you made me believe I could be more than just a king drowning in grief." "Alastair, be my queen, Vanessa. Not because of your bloodline, because you already are in every way that matters." He looked up at her with centuries of loneliness in his eyes. "Because I love you. Because my children love you. Because you belong here with us." Tears streamed down Vanessa's face. 7 years ago, a man had told her she was worthless. Now, a king knelt before her, offering everything. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Alastair stood and kissed her, soft and reverent and full of promise. Behind them, 5 children cheered. And Vanessa, once cast out for being broken, finally understood. She'd never been broken at all. She'd just been waiting for the right family to make her whole. The coronation gown was made of starlight and shadow. At least, that's what it looked like to Vanessa as the royal attendants fastened the final clasps. The fabric seemed to shift between midnight blue and silver white, embroidered with constellations that moved across the bodice like living things. It was ancient, the same gown Queen Seraphina had worn 3,000 years ago, preserved by magic and waiting for her. "You look like a story," Mira breathed from the doorway. All 5 children stood there in formal attire, miniature versions of court regalia, each wearing their house colors. But their expressions held nothing formal, just pure, uncomplicated joy. "Come here," Vanessa said, her voice thick with emotion. They rushed forward, careful not to wrinkle her gown but unable to contain their excitement. The attendants had left them alone for this moment, the final preparation before the ceremony. "We have something for you," Lucien said. He held out a small silver pin shaped like a crescent moon. "This was our mother's. She'd want you to have it." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "Lucien, I can't." "You can." His serious young face softened. "You're not replacing her. You're ours too now. In a different way." Ash stepped forward next, holding a carved wooden wolf. "I made this." "It's not fancy," but he shrugged, suddenly shy. "Wolves protect their pack. Like, you protect us." Vale offered a pressed night-blooming flower, perfectly preserved. "For remembering," he said quietly, "that beautiful things can grow in darkness." Saren simply took her hand and pressed something small and smooth into her palm, one of his patterned stones, worn smooth by countless arrangements, his gift of what he loved most. And Mira held out a drawing, all 6 of them, standing together beneath 3 moons. "For when you forget," she whispered, "that you belong with us." One by one, they pinned, tucked, and wove their tokens into her coronation cloak, a patchwork of love that meant more than any royal jewel. "Thank you," Vanessa managed through tears. "All of you, for choosing me." "You chose us too," Lucien pointed out. "You stayed." The doors to the throne room opened, and the sound that greeted them was thunder. Thousands of vampires assembled, their voices rising in an ancient chant of coronation. But Vanessa barely heard it. She walked down the obsidian hall with 5 children at her sides. Not ahead of her, not behind, beside her, where the family belonged. Their small hands occasionally brushed hers, reassuring and real. At the end of the hall, Alistair waited. He wore the full regalia of the Vampire King, dark armor etched with silver, a cloak that seemed made of living night. But his eyes held only warmth as he watched her approach. When she reached him, he didn't speak immediately. He just looked at her like she was everything he'd been searching for across 3 centuries. "Vanessa Hale," he finally said, his voice carrying to every corner of the realm. "Descendant of Queen Seraphina, bearer of the ancient light, protector of my children, and savior of this kingdom." He lifted the Nightstone crown from its velvet cushion. The crown was breathtaking. Black diamonds formed into a circlet of stars, with a single white stone at its center that pulsed with inner light. "I name you Queen of the Nocturnal Dominion." The crown settled on her head, and power surged through her, not taking, not changing, just recognizing. The kingdom itself acknowledged her claim. The throne room erupted. Thousands of voices shouting acceptance, approval, celebration. The rival houses who deposed her now cheered loudest, swept up in the moment's magic. The 3 moons visible through the vaulted ceiling seemed to glow brighter. But Vanessa only felt the small hand slipping into hers. Mira looked up at her, eyes shining. "You're not our mother," she whispered, just loud enough for Vanessa to hear. "You're our Vanessa. And that's better." Something in Vanessa's chest cracked open, the last piece of her old life, the last whisper of inadequacy, the final echo of Marcus's cruel voice. It all fell away, replaced by certainty. She was home, not because of bloodlines or prophecies or political necessity, because 5 children had chosen her, because a king had loved her, because she'd chosen to stay when every instinct screamed to run. Alistair took her other hand, and together they turned to face their kingdom. Their children pressed close, Lucien standing tall, Ash grinning wildly, Vale and Saren holding hands, Mira practically vibrating with excitement. In that moment, Vanessa saw herself as they saw her. Not the barren woman who'd been cast out. Not the broken thing she'd believed herself to be. But a queen. A mother. A woman who'd walked through winter and darkness and emerged into light. The woman once told she'd never be enough stood crowned in starlight, surrounded by the family she'd never thought she'd have. And she was finally, completely, radiantly whole. The end. Sometimes the family you're meant for isn't the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one that finds you freezing in the snow and chooses you anyway.